Liberalism seminar. My name is Ivan Marinovich. I'm professor here at Stanford Graduate School of Business, and it's my honor to introduce today Matt Taibbi. He's the author of the New York Times bestsellers Insane Clown President, The Divide, Griftopia, and The Great Derangement. He's a contributing editor for Rolling Stone and a winner of the 2008 National Magazine Award for his columns and commentary. His more recent book is I Can't Breathe, A Killing on Bay Street. It's about the infamous killing of Eric Garner by the New York City Police. Recently, he has investigated the seeming collusion and coordination between government, big tech, and universities to censor viewpoints, for which he has testified before Congress. He's here to talk about what he found. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you everybody for coming out. This is a real honor, and especially in the last year, it's been really interesting. Obviously, it's great to be able to talk to people from Stanford. There's been some enmity in public between the Twitter Files reporters and some of the programs at Stanford, but there's also been there have been quite a number of people on campus who were very helpful to us in researching this topic. Sometimes they didn't always agree with what we were doing, but we're helpful anyway. So it's great to be able to do this presentation, which I'll try to get through quickly so we can have a discussion about it. Basically, this is about free speech and digital censorship in America. This is a topic I've been covering for quite some time. And I just wanted to start with a slide that goes back a little bit in time just to show what the attitudes were once upon a time. So this is August 1st, 1989. And you might remember a pretty great hip hop album came out called Straight Outta Compton by NWA. And the FBI or someone in an FBI office sent a letter to Prestige Records, the outlet that put out NWA's work, and basically in sort of a polite tone complained. They said advocating violence and assault is wrong. They sort of wanted to share their thoughts on the matter. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that this was a national news phenomenon. Just the FBI, the act of the FBI sending a letter expressing its opinion about content to a content creator was considered a major speech issue, especially among American liberals. You see on the far left there, the Village Voice. I was actually an intern at the Voice roughly around this time, and I sat near a figure named Nat Hentoff, who was sort of the bard of American liberalism back in the day. He had a desk that was stacked far above his head with letters of people who had been involved in various speech causes, and this NWA issue with the FBI sending them a letter was for them a cause célèbre for a while. The New York Times covered it, the Washington Post covered it, the LA Times covered it, everybody covered it. And I wanted to point that out to contrast it with, if you go to the next slide, the Twitter Files, which was a story that I started working on roughly this week last year. I actually had been covering the topic of digital censorship for years before that, not constantly, but a bit, going back to 2018. We'll get to that. But the Twitter Files, at their essence, and go to the next slide, were the same story, except on a much huger scale. And we didn't know that initially. The first Twitter Files installment, which in hindsight I regret a little bit, because the choice of topic was spun as being partisan. Yeah, it was about the Hunter Biden laptop story. That was really about the decision within Twitter to block that story, along with Facebook, those two platforms blocked a New York Post expose about Hunter Biden's laptop. And this, I thought, was a historic episode in American censorship. We hadn't really had a preemptive restriction on the distribution of a news story like that. There hadn't even really been an attempt along those lines, except informally, unless you went all the way back to the Pentagon Papers. So this successful blockage, even for a very short time, I thought was a significant story. And because Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook had both testified before Congress and given an interview to Joe Rogan suggesting that he had been guided toward that decision by the FBI, I decided to focus on the Hunter Biden laptop story because I thought if there was evidence of government interference, we would find it there. We didn't find it in the Hunter Biden story, not exactly anyway, but once we got into open-ended searches of material within Twitter, we started to see stuff like this. And it began with, somewhat confusing emails where they were full of acronyms, some of which we recognized, some of which we didn't, but you see here as FBI referral, Iran election disinfo, and then there's just a list of accounts. And this would be followed by other things like it. If we go to the next screen, then it was just spreadsheets. You would see through, there'd be a government official, usually from something called the Foreign Influence Task Force, which is technically an FBI body, but it incorporates people from the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and they would be forwarding lists of account names. Then we started to see, if you go to the next one, there would be material that wouldn't even be categorized as disinformation exactly. You would see things like the following accounts contain anti-Ukraine narratives. So the first things that we saw from the FBI were kind of understandable. They actually had one whole field office devoted to looking for tweets from people telling people to vote for the presidential election on a Wednesday. And you can kind of understand there's an interest in preventing that kind of thing. You want people to be able to go out and vote. It's not a great exercise of free speech to tell people that the election's on a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday. But as you go deeper, and this would be a pattern throughout this entire experience, suddenly it broadens into something else. Anti-Ukraine narratives, is that disinformation exactly? Is that incorrect factually? What exactly are they asking? Then we started to see more. We could move on, Yvonne. Sometimes there would be very elaborate, highly produced reports that would sort of recommend that the platforms be on the lookout for things like neo-Nazi, the theme of Ukrainians as neo-Nazis. There'd be recommendations about Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and Burisma. In a few cases, we were able to determine that these didn't come from the FBI, but came from foreign intelligence services. But if you go on to the next, from there, then we started to see this, and this is where things really sort of heated up for us. These emails were about something called an industry meeting. And initially, what we were seeing were sort of informal communications between agencies like the FBI, the DHS, and platforms like Twitter. Then we started to see, especially in the summer of 2020, there were a series of communications where basically the gist of it was, let's get organized, let's do this in a way that's not ad hoc anymore. We're going to have a regular meeting between FBI, DHS, ODNI, and multiple companies, not just Twitter, but Twitter, Google, Facebook, Pinterest, Wikimedia, and many others. They would be in the subject line if you opened it, which you can't hear. And then there would be a briefing from a government official about all sorts of things. You see I've highlighted here OGA briefing. And OGA, as we learned, was It's a euphemism for other government agencies, which is a euphemism sometimes for the CIA specifically or intelligence generally. Either way, there was a lot of OGA in these meetings. They were originally monthly, then they became weekly. And this was the beginning of what we discovered was sort of an organized content flagging bureaucracy. You can go on. The numbers of flagged requests started to be so much that you saw things like this. This is an FBI agent apologizing. I apologize in advance for adding to your workload. We're like, basically, we're sending you so much stuff. I'm sorry. And there was grumbling, some of which we published that was humorous. But Twitter was doing a lot of work for. Well, it wasn't really clear who was working for whom in this situation. I'm still not entirely clear about it. It's an interesting question, one that I think needs to be debated a little bit. What exactly is going on here? But they were sending lots of stuff, and they were conscious of how much they were sending. Go on. One of the criticisms that we got early on was that, oh, this is only about right-wing media or right-wing concerns. And we obviously didn't have the manpower or the person power to go through every single one of these lists. There were so many. I mean, they were coming on a daily basis, and they came in multiple formats, and oftentimes they were in sort of spreadsheet form like this, and we couldn't contact every single one, but sometimes we would recognize names. And here, for instance, this is on a list of accounts, I believe, that were suspected of propaganda for pro-Venezuelan propaganda, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to go back and look. But in any case, the Truth Out, which is sort of a left-leaning online site, they were on this list. And that was one of many, as it turned out, kind of lefty websites that were mixed in there, along with some traditionally conservative sites, actually quite a few traditionally conservative sites. But I just wanted to put that in there just so people understand that it's not just one side or the other. So going on, the industry meeting ended up beginning a process by which all the platforms basically sat down and said, we have to have a system by which you can send us all of your complaints or your flags, and it has to be formalized so we're not getting it from all directions. As it turned out, this didn't really help Twitter. See, the Twitter executives were very upset because it started to happen that too many officials from too many different government agencies got the phone numbers of like the people in the trust and safety department at Twitter, and they were getting calls all day long to, you should look at this, you should look at that. They wanted to centralize it, so they did settle on a system eventually where everything would come through, everything that came from the federal government would be sent through the FBI, through this portal called Teleporter. And this was unfortunate for us because most of the material in Teleporter was on a timer. So we could see that there had been something there, but we weren't able to retrieve most of the complaints, but we knew they were coming. But that system didn't work. And if you go on to the next one, you'll see that in addition to the teleporter material, they were still getting emails from all over the place from multiple different agencies. On the left there, where it looks like just a list in type, that came from a foreign intelligence service, through the FITF, the Foreign Intelligence, the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force. Then they continued to send Excel spreadsheets full of names, and then sometimes there would just be lists of names, and they would often not even have an elaborate explanation for why they were there. Going on to the next one, we thought this was interesting. Here's an FBI agent after the election in 2021, basically saying, hey, you're going to start getting stuff from the FBI and the USIC, the intelligence community regarding the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. And again, when we started to actually get some of those flags, some of it was what you would classify as disinformation, and some of it was just sort of anti-U.S., and we'll get to that in a moment. But moving on, now this was a key email. This was a letter from an FBI agent to Yoel Roth, who was the head of trust and safety at Twitter. If you read it, basically it's a deal. It's saying the FBI is going to handle everything from the federal side. We can give you everything from the FBI and U.S. intelligence agencies. CISA, which is the DHS, that's Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, will know what's going on in each state. And so they had this two-tiered information flow. Federal stuff came from through the FBI. The state stuff, which came through this convoluted system called, during the elections, it came through something called the Election Integrity Partnership, which we'll get to. But this went down to the level of local police forces in Midwestern states like Minnesota and Wisconsin. They would be funneled up to a state level. The state official would send it to DHS. DHS would send it to Twitter, and it would be handled relatively quickly. So this email was key because it outlined basically the entire system for us. Going forward, all right. I just wanted to share this because this is how sparse the information sometimes was. They would sometimes in great detail tell you why they were sending you accounts. And then in other cases, there would be just one single paragraph that would say something like the attached email accounts were possibly used for influence operations, social media collection, or social engineering. So it really depended on who at Twitter got these letters, but sometimes they would look all the way into it, and sometimes they would not do their own investigations. So we found both instances. Sometimes Twitter would say no, and they wouldn't just willy-nilly remove the account. Sometimes they would, but the lack of explication I thought was very interesting. Moving on. This was, we thought, fascinating in relation to the war in Ukraine. Here's the Ukrainian Secret Service, the SBU, sends a letter to the FBI with a list of account names that it wants taken down. And you can see that I've highlighted a couple of them here. One of them is the Canadian journalist, well-known journalist, friend of mine, Aaron Mate. He's on there. The Communist Party of Russia is on there. There's a newspaper that I actually used to write for when I lived in Russia called Komsomolskaya Pravda. They're on there. And the Foreign Ministry of the Russian Federation is on there. They pass on all these requests to Twitter to take these accounts down. This seemed to me a striking thing for the FBI to outsource a request to remove American content to a foreign intelligence agency. Twitter, to its credit, didn't take down Aaron Mate's account. They actually wrote a letter back saying, we kind of can't do that. But they did take down most of the rest of them, and we thought that was interesting. So, moving on, well, then we started getting into the question of, well, is it just the FBI doing this? And the answer is no. There was a whole galaxy of agencies. So there were multiple different kinds of these flags that came to Twitter. Some of them would be from an agency like HHS or even the CDC, and they would be complaining about something specific to their situation, like the COVID pandemic. But there were also additionally government agencies that were whose mandate was anti-disinformation specifically. So they were all over the place. They were writing to Twitter about and Twitter and other platforms about huge ranges of topics, and not just confining themselves to whatever their agency's ostensible mandate was. The Global Engagement Center, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, but it's technically a State Department entity. We knew nothing about it at the beginning. Here you can see they're talking about COVID misinformation. They're identifying zero hedge as a problem. It's sort of a popular website. Some people accuse it of purveying conspiracy theories, but one of the things Zero Hedge was doing was promoting the idea that COVID came from a lab in China, and this was considered misinformation. And the GEC's complaint, if you actually read through it, is not so much what Zero Hedge wrote, but the fact that so many people reacted to it the wrong way. And this is an important concept, this idea of what is the political reaction to it, as opposed to whether it's factually true or not. So moving on. In another instance that I thought was amazing, the GEC, which is nicknamed GEC, they sent a list of 5,500 names, just another one of these gigantic spreadsheets to Twitter. And they were, ostensibly, it was Chinese disinformation about the pandemic. And you can see that they, unlike some of the other agencies, the FBI didn't do this as much. For instance, the GEC was trying to get its foot in the door with Twitter and other platforms, and to do that, they were trying to exercise some leverage. So what they would do is they would send their lists of names to popular media outlets at the same time that they were sending them to Twitter. And so these stories about people and accounts that had to be taken down that were guilty of misinformation, they made headlines in every place from Al Jazeera to Breitbart to the New York Times to other places. And many of these accounts turned out to be not even Chinese. There were CNN accounts. Some of them were Chinese sort of embassy officials, but there were multiple Canadian accounts on this list. There was a huge brouhaha behind the scenes. Ultimately, this list was kind of repudiated publicly by the government, but I wanted to show this because this is an important factor in how all this works. Sometimes they don't go straight to the platform. Sometimes these agencies or academic researchers, they will go to the media first as a way to kind of exert pressure on the platforms, because otherwise it can be said that they're not taking things down quickly enough. Moving on. The GEC had would frequently send reports about things they called information ecosystems, and the concept here is if a politician is too in line with, say, Russia or Iran or China or some other foreign country that is considered not aligned with our interests, they would say that this politician was part of that ecosystem. So it's sort of a guilt by association situation. And they sent a list of accounts, and if you read closely, you'll see that it says, yeah, some of them are pushing COVID misinformation and other things, but some of them are also just they are attacking Italian politicians, the EU, and the United States. And people on the list included politicians like Giuseppe Conte, who was he's a figure in Italy. He's not exactly equivalent to Bernie Sanders, but he's roughly that kind of person. They had other Italian Democrats on this list. but they frequently use this tactic of saying somebody was in the information ecosystem of, you know, a certain foreign power. Going on. All right, now we get to Stanford. Probably don't need to go into this all that much, but the Election Integrity Partnership was one of the outsourced mechanisms through which the government was working sort of hand in glove with sometimes academic outlets, sometimes civil society organizations. The EIP basically became like a clearinghouse for election misinformation, disinformation, and you can see here that they're saying that they got 600. They processed 639 in-scope tickets. These are what they call JIRA tickets about individual websites. I know because from one of the people who testified sort of behind closed doors to Congress about this, not testified, I guess gave a deposition, that each one of those tickets could refer to thousands of accounts. And you'll see in their final report, they boast that 35% of the URLs, Michael Schellenberger talked about this last week, that they shared with the various platforms were either labeled, removed, or soft blocked. This was back when they were promoting that as a positive. You know, we're effective 35% of the time and getting things actioned. If you go on. So one of the main issues with the EIP is it a government program? Is it not a government program? In the Twitter files, we had already seen emails to the effect that before EIP was established, that DHS was looking to establish a centralized portal for reporting election information. Recently, the House Weaponization of Government Committee released an email that they found, you know, after issuing a subpoena to the SIO, that contained an email from the Atlantic Council basically saying that EIP was set up at the request of the Department of Homeland Security. You know, I never thought that this distinction was all that meaningful, but because they already officially listed in their literature CISA and GEC as basically partners in this enterprise. So whether it was initiated by CISA or DHS, or whether that happened along the line, it looks like it was initiated, however, by DHS. It was a government partnered organization. And we can go on. This is just an indication about how they sometimes give varying answers about the First Amendment. I saw that in some of these depositions behind the scenes, there was an EIP official who said, we weren't concerned about infringing on the First Amendment because we're not a government actor. But then when you look at the same subpoenaed information that the Weaponization of Government Committee got, the research director at EIP, Renee DeResta, she has notes in one of her presentations to mention the fact that the EIP has unclear legal authorities, including very real First Amendment questions. So this is another theme that's constant with this. Like sometimes they may represent one thing publicly, and then privately there are concerns. We can go on. So the Virality Project was the successor to EIP, and there's a couple of concepts that are important with the Virality Project. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this whole anti-disinformation era is if you go back to the kind of pre-internet age, people like me, journalists like myself, we were always trained that, you know, there are very serious restrictions on speech in journalism. You got to deal with libel and defamation and all kinds of other issues. And but the system punishes the speech, not the speaker. So if I lose a libel case, it's not like I get thrown out of media. I mean, it might be career crushing depending on how bad the offense was. And sometimes journalists deserve that. Sometimes, however, it's more in the realm of an honest mistake that actually did damage to somebody, and you got to remunerate the victim and move on. The whole point is, though, that the system was designed to try to encourage reporters and other purveyors of content to do better, right? Like, in other words, if you get punished, if you get caught doing something wrong, it's not like you have a scarlet letter on you forever and you're removed from the speech landscape. You have to pay the piper and learn your lesson and, you know, get back on the saddle. This system very specifically does not do that. And if you see the little notation below there, this is one of the first letters that was sort of sent internally to the multiple platforms that were involved in the Virality Project. They talk about repeat offenders, and they mention Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and they mention the fact that content by people like this is quote unquote almost always reportable. So they're focused on the person, not what that person is saying. And this also shows up in sort of some of the algorithmic calculations that go into speech suppression. The person would accumulate demerits as opposed to the speech. You can go on. The Virality Project was also a place where we got to see very clearly the concept of malinformation. The Department of Homeland Security, CISA, has something called the MDM subcommittee. That's misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. Malinformation is information that is true but produces the wrong political outcome. So you see here, they're tracking things like news stories about breakthrough infections, cases of people having vaccine injury, and people talking about natural immunity, not because any of these things were factually incorrect, but because they might have promoted hesitancy. They might have, inspired people to not get the vaccine. So again, totally opposite to the old journalism model, which is, if it's true, it's fine. We put it out there, and then it's sort of up to the public to deal with it. They're thinking ahead. They're thinking, we have to imagine how people are going to respond to this politically and deal with it on that level. Next one. And this brings us to Stanford's own Jay Bhattacharya. If Jay's here tonight, here today, hello, Jay. He's a beautiful person. The thing on the far right there, that little screenshot, that's one of the very first things that we saw in the Twitter files. That Barry Weiss and I were sitting in front of a terminal, and we saw that little notation that says Trends Blacklist. That's how we knew that Jay's speech was being de-amplified on Twitter. There's also an example here from Martin Kulldorff. You can see the letter that came out of another investigation involving Francis Collins, saying that the Great Barrington Declaration needs to be a quick and devastating takedown of its premise. So we don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly what the in-between story is there, but we do know that the end story with Jay is that, and people like him, is that they were suppressed even though they weren't factually incorrect. In fact, there isn't even an assertion of disinformation. So to go on. Same thing. This is from the Missouri v. Biden lawsuit, which is in which Dr. Bhattacharya is a plaintiff. This is a letter from Facebook to a WHO official talking about how the stuff that basically you're asking us to take down, this is often true content. And this is very similar to what was going on at the VP, but I just wanted to show that it's across multiple platforms. Keep going. Good. Which brings us to the CTI League. This is the stuff that we just started, Michael Schellenberger and I just started putting out last week. A whistleblower came forward with documents about a group that was ostensibly volunteer. It was founded by a British data scientist named Sarah Jane Terp and a an official, often called a technologist for Special Operations Command. He was a Navy commander at the time as well. The CTI League, or CTIL, this was ostensibly about identifying COVID misinformation and sending that information to the platforms. A couple of notes here. One, you can see in the sort of in the bottom right-hand corner, that's Brian Krebs. I'm sorry, Chris Krebs of the CISA, the head of CISA, sort of announcing that they're partnering with the CTI League. And then the other interesting thing about CTIL is just that there's a lot of stuff about offense, not just about censorship or de-amplification, but about doing things like creating sock puppet accounts to go onto Twitter and Facebook to infiltrate groups like the Boogaloo Boys. It instructed people on using burner email and phone numbers, creating false identities. You can see that there's a notation there to, lock your shit down, I think is what it says. So there's all the sort of spycraft involved, and we're at the early stages of understanding what that's about, but this is offensive information operations as opposed to just defensive. A couple of last ones. One of the early trainings for the CTIL, like the second slide in it is a quote from the Joint Chiefs of Staff talking about how countermeasures are a form of military science that's designed to impair the operational effectiveness of enemy activity. They can be active or passive, and can be deployed preemptively or reactively. 2 points about this. One, these are people who we're going to be reviewing the speech of other Americans, and they're talking about impairing the effectiveness of the enemy. So that's it's a military conception. If I had more time, I'd go into the idea that, I was told by people who worked in the counterterrorism world that this is part of a switch. This whole world moved from what he called CT to CP, counterterrorism to counterpopulism. You see this all across the military bureaucracy. The other thing is that they're talking about preemptive action. This is a very big theme with CTI League, and we're starting to see in other places too, what they call left of boom operations, pre-bunking, trying to do something before the bad speech gets to be aired on platforms. And so that's not just merely reacting, that's acting preemptively. And then just a few more. CTIL quickly went after left and right. You see there's anti-lockdown protests they were monitoring on one side. I know it's very hard to read, but if you actually look at that fuzzy little thing there, you'll see that they were monitoring hashtags like healthcare for all. There were pro-Palestinian groups in there. Again, common misconception that it's just the right. It's also the left. It's more the right, but it's also the left. And then just a couple more. The head of CTIL, Sarah Jane Terp, she was giving a training. She talked about how the real one-on-one here is happy or sad. A lot of these folks came from the corporate marketing world. They were, in addition to the military training that some of these people had, they were also experts in brand management. So they were looking at content in terms of, does this reflect poorly or well on our product? And let's apply that to things like nation states too. Is this pro or anti-US? Is this pro or anti-US policy? And that's how they started to define disinformation. And then I think this is the last one. This comes from a FOIA request that I got back recently, where one of the members of the CISA MDM subcommittee, also a researcher at the University of Washington, Kate Starbird. There's a letter from her, but they talk about creating programs that would empower individuals to be resilient against despair-inducing MDM. So here you have, you go from misinformation to despair-inducing MDM, which could be malinformation. Again, could be true activity, and that's kind of the same happy sad distinction. Like, are we going after this material because it makes people sad about current policy or their situation? We also saw stuff about what they call financial MD. So that could be, hey, there's nervousness about this bank. Do we need to step in and prevent people from spreading rumors? So maybe they'll to stop a run to the exits. Think about the applications of that. You know, they could be very wide ranging. And actually, I'm just going to stop here. I mean, because I could go on and talk about contractors like NewsGuard and Global Disinformation Index, who are also getting funding from the government. But just with these slides, I just wanted to show sort of the universe of where all these requests and all this anti-disinformation activity is coming from. You have the Department of Defense is involved in some of this. You have, you know, agencies like DHS, FBI, the Department of State. Nearly all of them are specifically legally barred from being, you know, meddling in the domestic news landscape, and yet they are in many different ways, and both formally, informally. So it's an extraordinarily ambitious thing. We're only just starting to understand it. You know, how far does it extend? How much money is involved in it? When we try to find out the answers to those questions, we find that, for instance, the list of contractors for the Global Engagement Center are mostly redacted. Even in, you know, freedom of information requests, we can't find the budgeting information. So it's the beginning of a long slog to understanding how big this thing is and what exactly they're up to. But to me, as a journalist, it looks like an improper incursion of government into the domestic news landscape in ways that would have been considered absolutely scandalous back, you know, when that NWA story broke. So with that, I'd love to take some questions and maybe have a little discussion about some of this.
Thank you, Matt. Great presentation. Now we open the floor for questions, so feel free to raise your hand if you have questions. So the first question by Josh Rao.
Thanks, Matt. Great presentation and great work. My question for you is, what trend do you see now in this, now that you and your colleagues have exposed some of it, and also Twitter under Musk may be different from Twitter under his leadership a year or 2 years ago. So wondering whether you see the sort of forces that are doing this now. Do you see evidence that they're now on the defensive to some extent, or do you think a lot of this stuff is still sort of just proceeding? Do you have reason to believe that a lot of this stuff is still proceeding apace?
That's a great question. We have seen some evidence that, for instance, we don't know of an election integrity partnership project for 2024. We know they did something smaller scale for 2022. We've heard that some of that stuff has been defunded in DHS. But we're also seeing things like the Digital Services Act being passed in Europe. You know, there's a new law that's, you know, coming down the pipeline in Ireland that's pretty extreme. There are laws in other countries. The problem with that being that the internet is global. So, you know, if you have content that you have to take down for the EU, it has ramifications for the whole platform. You know, the significance of the Elon Musk thing, and Elon and I have obviously had our differences, but this system, I don't think that we looked at, this kind of sub rosa system, that it doesn't really work if there's somebody dropping out. It's a cartel and it needs everybody on board. And I think that's part of why the reaction to him has been you know, so violent. But you know, we've seen stories in the news about quoting some of these people about how it's become so hard to do their work. and maybe that's true, and maybe that's evidence that there's been some progress, but it also could be that they're just moving this whole thing somewhere else. And the other problem is that there's a Supreme Court case maybe coming, this Missouri v. Biden. Even if you get the best ruling in the world on that, where's the enforcement mechanism? How do we know that it would be stopped? The stuff, I think, was already against the law for a lot of these things. But you would need some kind of agency to go in and root it out, and I don't know what that process would be.
Okay, so I'm going to give priority to new participants. So the next is Kwang, Greg, John, and Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Matt. Great talk. I think it's somewhat a related question. So on this platform, X now, they made a community notes like a very essential feature. I think in the spirit of what you talked about, they criticized the post and not necessarily the person. Do you have any comment on that? Is that something that you're seeing as effective?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously prefer, there's a couple of things I like about the community notes option as opposed to what they were doing. One is that you can see it, the huge problem with what they were doing before and what they're still doing, especially with de-amplification, where they're dialing down. I mean, it's incredible the tools they have. They can, if they want to dial your traffic down 91.5%, they can do that. You don't know whether what you're saying is unpopular or whether it's being suppressed or what. Community notes is at least, you can at least see what's going on, and it's not punitive in the same way. Obviously, there are some problems because sometimes the community notes are incorrect too. I don't know what the solution to this problem is. The old school way of litigating everything, you couldn't do that without overwhelming the court system. So I don't know what the solution is exactly, but I think that's more in the spirit of doing it correctly than what they were doing before.
Gregory Kearney.
Hey, Matt, I'm a huge fan of your work. I just had a quick question on the actual process by which these things are done. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can. Yep, absolutely.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I'm curious, after 3 years of studying this stuff, whether or not you see any role for security agencies to do something about disinformation campaigns and what that process would look like in your ideal scenario.
Thanks. Yeah, it's Greg, right? I mean, it's a really interesting question. I talk to people, if you go back to the 80s, Ronald Reagan created something called the Active Measures Working Group once, and this was designed to respond to Soviet disinformation. If you might remember, there were stories that America created AIDS. There was another story that was attributed to Soviet news that we were behind the attack on the Pope. And so what do you do about that? Does the government have a role in stopping that? Well, it's an interesting question, right? Like I would think, as a journalist, I certainly don't want the FBI calling up either my distributor or my editor and making recommendations about content. But what I do think they should be allowed to do, and this is what they used to do, is they used to thoroughly research and debunk a topic if they were able to do so, publish that, and then spread the word to journalists. I don't have any kind of problem with government being involved in propagandizing its point of view, and even pointing out errors. It's where they go in and make deals to remove things domestically. And the metaphor here isn't even calling your editor. It's basically like calling the company that has the fleet of trucks that deliver your papers, or asking Ma Bell to prevent phone calls. I just don't think they have that role can ever be legitimate. I have talked to some people who are military contractors who have found ways that are far less intrusive, that would be that would limit what they do to strictly identifying actual foreign bots or foreign accounts that are like intelligence related, as opposed to this very broad concept of, you know, you're saying the same things as the Russian Foreign Ministry, therefore you're misinformation. If they're going to do it, I would at least think that they should be able to do it in a more targeted way. But that makes me very nervous. So, thank you. Thanks, Greg.
John Cochran.
Hi, thank you. This is wonderful. I have two questions. First, you mentioned that there's this ecosystem of helpers and fellow travelers, like our Internet Observatory. But you also mentioned, so the government asks Facebook, you know, take down Matt Taibbi because he's an awful guy. Is Facebook just happily yes, sir, going along, or what are the government's threats? I sense in here that there's a threat we can unleash an army of regulators on you and close you down tomorrow, which is also extraordinarily illegal. Regulators are supposed to be following procedures, not just, you know, call up the alphabet soup and see who we can use to shut down Facebook tomorrow. But I'm curious what you have found as far as the explicit or implicit threats that gets cooperation from, at least sometimes they must not want to do it. And second, the counter-populism that you just said that our entire national security establishment had gone from counterterrorism to counter-populism, which, and I know what counter-populism means, and his name starts with a T. And I'm just astounded to hear that. It's new to me. So the more you want to tell us about that, that would be better.
Yes, thank you. So as to the first question, the threat element is a huge part of the Missouri v. Biden case. I heard this argued at an appellate hearing for that case in New Orleans. There are instances where spokespeople for the Biden administration will talk about things that are happening on Twitter in one breath, and then they will say 2 sentences later that maybe it's time to revisit Section 230. And, you know, so as close as you can come to making an overt threat. I mean, I watched 2 federal judges compare that to the mafia saying, nice store you have there, be ashamed if something happened to it. So yes, there's that. In 2017, when a bunch of these companies were called to the Hill to testify about, you know, where there was a demand, you have to come up with a plan to prevent the sowing of discord. That came simultaneously with like a white paper that was being issued by some of the people in that committee, including Senator Mark Warner, with a long list of proposed regulations and tax changes for these companies. And we even saw in the Twitter files, one of the Twitter files threads is sort of about this, where they're talking about, we're being pressured to come up with stuff proving the existence of Russian bots, and they're doing things, they're contemplating legislation that would impact our ad revenue. And we saw that in one email, right? So absolutely, the threat is very, very clear, and it's a big part of this case. And so far I've seen judges be very persuaded by that. The answer that I saw the government lawyer give to that question was just they're not doing it in the same sentence, basically. So yeah, I don't know about that. And sorry, what was the other question again?
Just you're saying that the entire intelligence apparatus has gone from counterterrorism to counterpopulism, i.e., domestic politics. That just shocked me. I hadn't heard of that before.
Yeah, so CT to CP, that this was something like we didn't understand why all of a sudden these anti-disinformation groups were appearing in 2015, 2016. And I talked to somebody who used to work for GEC, had been in the military. GEC used to be a thing called CSCC. Its explicit mandate was Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They spent all their time in doing Arab language stuff, creating phony Arab language accounts. And then the first head of GEC, when they shut down CSCC, they morphed into GEC. the first head was this guy, Rick Stengel. And actually, Yvonne, there's a slide down there for it says information wars, if you want to share it. But
Is that
oh, it's in red farther down, I think.
just this?
In there.
Next, let me know when you want me to.
Next, I think two more.
Sorry.
There
Yep.
it is. Okay, so Stengel, he wrote a book about this, and he talks about how, see, this the information battles we've been fighting far away had come home. Then he talks about how Trump and Brexit are influencing his thinking. He starts lumping ISIS, Putin, and Trump together, and you know, this is kind of a common thing. And the other aspect of it that, you know, I heard from multiple people who, so we started to get calls from people in the military who were upset that this stuff was being deployed at home. First of all, a lot of these folks don't have a lot of confidence in the expertise and competence of the new people manning these positions. But other folks, you know, think, hey, we developed these really hardcore tools to go after sort of mass murdering terrorists, and now they're going to let loose some of this stuff at home. Like, this is crazy. And so what we saw, we started to hear from those folks. One of the things we heard was when the money started drying up for the counterterrorism mission, the people who were heading a lot of these groups, and there's like one in every corner of the national security universe, started to articulate this new cause. And after Arab Spring, after Occupy, Tea Party, then it's Brexit, then it's Trump, then it's Corbyn, the Bernie Sanders movement. They just, you know, they see these things, they're classifying these things as kind of threat disturbances in kind of the same way. And I think it's really creepy, and it shows a total, like, you know, confusion about the difference between an electoral movement and you know, a real national security threat.
Okay, next is Berk.
Okay, Matt, thank you for a great talk. Here's my question. I mean, the stuff spanned two administrations from vastly different perspectives. So it's hard for me to see this as some kind of centralized thing. It seems like very decentralized. And if it's decentralized, how is it happening? Is this just individuals who are taking on for the good and using their government roles in inappropriate ways? What do you think's going on?
Well, that's a good question. You know, you do have to wonder, you know, how do you square this with the fact that Trump was president? You know, I think the only thing you can say is maybe he didn't understand what was going on with these programs all that well. If you look, there's been a long developing kind of NGO presence about this. You know, groups like the Aspen Institute have been, you know, producing papers about disinformation for quite some time. And there's a whole community of academics around the world who've been working on this, and it's resulted in draft legislation that's actually been passed, like the Digital Services Act, which is, you know, it's basically a formalized version of what we were looking at under the hood at Twitter. And you know, there are other laws in places like Australia that got passed, or at least rules with the institution of with the arrival of COVID. I think, you know, I think they have been doing this in an organized way, in a semi-organized way, and I say that because what we saw in the Twitter files almost looked like it was a competitive thing, where different groups were competing to be the clearinghouse for this stuff. So GEC wanted to be more listened to than the FBI. Twitter had a preference for the FBI, and that irritated the State Department. We've seen DOD, you know, and DHS. They had more of a hand in EIP and VP and the CTI League. It's sort of like a rush for contracting dollars, I think. I mean, I'm only just beginning to learn about this, and we have limited visibility into everything. And it's not like a Bilderberg thing, I don't think, where there's just a bunch of people in a room captaining it. But it does seem like this has been a direction that a lot of these groups have been going in for a long time.
But who's they?
Well, just, for instance, the military has, the Pentagon probably has a dozen different anti-disinformation or counter-disinformation operations going at once. In the UK, you had everything from the intelligence-based anti-disinformation groups like the Integrity Initiative to they have a uniformed military group called the 77th Information Brigade in Britain that's been around for quite some time, actually dating back to the early 2010s, if I'm not mistaken. But specifically, like domestic counter disinformation, I think is a thing that started to appear in the American context mainly in 2015, 2016. That's when GEC was founded. DHS creates CISA. They define cognitive infrastructure as something that they feel is a critical infrastructure. I don't know how it all works. I think some of these agencies just drifted in that direction because ideologically they believe that these things are really threats. In some cases it's contracting, in some cases they're true believers. And so, I think that's an important question. I don't know the answer to it yet.
So next is Anup, Cole, and Kevin.
Hi, Matt. That was a great talk. You've been doing great work, and I've been following it for a while, so keep it up. I have a question about remedies, which you talked about. So, obviously Missouri v. Biden, and that might lead to injunctive relief. And maybe there could be some damages, but there are not a lot of cases that I know of on this. And I wanted to figure out if you could talk to us a little bit about what other efforts there are. And then more importantly, I think knowing about the sorts of people that are standing up for a lot of these, or standing up to tackle some of these problems that you're talking about. Are there a lot of lawyers or groups willing to take on these cases? Is there an internal constituency for a more traditional view of the First Amendment within government that you're hearing from, in addition to whistleblowers, actual maybe lawyers or administrators? I'm at a law school, at a reasonably good one, I think. And at the University of Chicago, there's not a lot of appetite among First Amendment scholars, I think, to take on this question, which seems a first order question. I haven't heard about it at other schools too, but I imagine you have. So it'd be great to hear a little bit about who's joining the fight.
That's a great question. I'm sorry, what was your name again? Kevin?
Anup Malani.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
So, yeah, well, institutionally in government, it's been a huge disappointment to me. I used to talk pretty regularly with people like Dennis Kucinich, like the traditional sort of left-leaning civil libertarian caucus that used to have in the Democratic side is kind of gone. There's nobody there. Like Rouhana, I think, is sympathetic on these issues, but doesn't really make it a priority to talk about them. The committee that I've testified before twice is intensely investigating this stuff. So are a couple of other Republican committees. There are a few senators who really care about it. After that, institutionally, there are groups like FIRE, which is taking up some of this, the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and that there's some, which is just importantly, there's some money there that's coming in for lawsuits. The old ACLU, there are a few of these folks like Nadine Strawson, who ran the ACLU for years, has been very outspoken about this, but there's not a lot of institutional oomph behind taking this on. So yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And the real disappointment to me, though, however, has been the news media. I mean, this is the biggest direct threat is to us, and there's almost no support whatsoever within the business for even addressing this issue. Maybe that will change now because of the Gaza issue. You know, we've seen that there's some people who are upset about, you know, that the suppression of that speech. But beyond that, I don't know. It's not really usually my specialty to figure out what the answer is, but I mean, I'm curious to know what you think. I mean, legally, I've actually sat down with people who are First Amendment lawyers and talked to them, and they either have never heard of this issue because they only read the New York Times and watch MSNBC, or you know, they think it's appropriate, or you know, they think that we need to do something about you know, there is misinformation on the internet, and that's why it makes it a tough issue. So I don't know, but I do think something has to be done legally, just mainly just on the intelligence services and law enforcement front. Like, I just don't think they can have a role in media and have that be a good thing.
Great. Cole, Kevin, and Randy.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for your great talk. I've been a fan of your writing going back to the epic takedown of Tom Friedman and his rule of holes. One of my favorite things I've probably ever read. So thanks for being here. Question I wanted to ask you is somewhat personal. I know that there was an incident involving the IRS that came perhaps in response to some of your reporting for the Twitter files. Could you tell us about that and how it was resolved, if it has been?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for the question. When I was testifying before the committee, the Weaponization of Government Committee, the first time when I got home that night, my wife brought me a note that had been left in the door by the IRS telling me to call in 4 days. Apparently I actually have a relative who works for the Treasury. So this is how I know this. It's a tactic to let you freak out over the weekend about what that might be. So they don't answer your call if you call before then. I called, they told me about an issue that seemed very odd to me. It was basically that one of my, or actually two of my returns have been rejected due to identity theft concerns. I didn't know any money, but I told the committee, but I didn't think it could possibly have anything to do with any of my reporting. I thought that was way too weird and conspiratorial. But the committee ran with it, and they sent a letter to the IRS asking for information. And then we got information back showing that the new case that had been opened on me on December 24th, 2022, or 2022, which was Christmas Eve and a Saturday, and the day that I think the Twitter file story that made me the most nervous came out. And that was the first time I thought, well, maybe it is connected. Anyway, it led to a discussion between the Judiciary Committee and the Treasury Department, and they promised to stop doing home visits, or at least curtail them severely. There were some other incidents that were maybe less politically motivated, but seemed kind of abusive, and that led to a policy change, which I've never seen a politician actually do something for me in my life. So that was really interesting. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it still could be a coincidence, but it's awfully weird, I think.
Thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Really great stuff. You know, I was very timely because I was going to ask you about the mainstream, media places, but I was going to start with just the observation that, back when McLuhan saw the internet coming, he said the curators of our information have a lot of power over us, and the internet is going to create a global village where they lose that power. They're going to hate it. And then he actually said, 50 years ago, they're going to organize inattention so that they can recapture the power to curate our lives. And that, he saw this coming a long time ago, and the organized inattention happens because the internet is not just the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Evening News. Back then in the AP, it's kind of easy to curate. But I kind of wonder, it feels like the curators in the media, that they want their power back. That's my theory. But the way they've treated you is really just inconsistent with everything you learned at journalism school, at least used to. And so I wonder if you've uncovered a lot of evidence. You showed us a little glimpse of it, of like the New York Times or the Washington Post sort of just taking their marching orders, it seems almost like, right? Like they say, hey, you need to write a story about Jay Bhattacharya or Scott Atlas or something, and then they do. Have you looked for a lot of that stuff? Have you found a lot of that stuff? Because I think that's part of it, is that they're kind of part of that team historically, and they don't like the fact that they have to compete with others for attention.
So I love that question. Sadly, I didn't look for it, but found an awful lot of it. And I think you're right. What's really weird about this is that the news media company should have a built-in animus for the tech companies, or at least they should be representing their own interests, because the tech companies basically in one fell swoop swallowed up their whole commercial advantage. The newspapers made their money because they had their own distribution networks. If you wanted to put an ad out in the greater Boston area, you had to go to either the Herald or the Globe, because they were the only people who had trucks that could deliver to every door. Well, the internet comes along, they wipe that advantage away, and they start doing much better, more effective advertising, and suddenly they've got all the money and they're real billionaires, and the media is like broke, and they're in this hapless position. But you see over and over again in these communications that they're getting marching orders from NGOs, from FBI agents will tip them off to things. There was a bogus story that was planted about Russian bots, that were following a Senate Republican candidate named Roy Moore in Alabama. It turned out to be this company called New Knowledge that was doing it, I guess, as a political dirty trick. But one element of the story was that they called up a whole bunch of journalists and said, hey, did you notice all those Russian accounts that are following Roy Moore? And we see in the Twitter files all these letters from the Washington Post and other news outlets saying, hey, are you gonna do something about this? And that was pretty much the only kind of letter we saw is, how come you haven't taken down this account or that account yet? We just got a report from X person, and you haven't acted yet. Why? And if they don't comply, there's a sort of implied threat that you're going to get a headline the next day. Twitter is allowing misinformation and hate on its platform. The other last thing I'll say about that is, one of the really weird things that I noticed is that the marching orders could come in any order. It could start with the FBI, go to a research institute, then go to the media, then go to Twitter. It could start with the Anti-Disinformation Institute at Clemson, go to the FBI, then the FBI goes to Twitter, the Twitter goes to the media. Like, it was interchangeable, which is really weird. And one of the reporters for The Guardian sort of described this as a shared endeavor. And I think that's kind of what it is. It's like groups that should be kind of checking each other's power or should have their own interests. They're cooperating in this thing in a weird way. It's just really creepy.
Wayne, Rundy.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for the presentation and for the work you do. You said the media should have a special interest in what you're doing. And I want to say that academia should also have such a special interest in what you're doing. I think everybody probably in this room can confirm that academia in general has no interest in what you're doing. Bringing your name up is dangerous. And Tachi science, and of course, the things you brought out about origin of COVID and masking and the vaccine and lockdowns and things like that are really important to train students in how to make good decisions, how to learn from the past and make a better future. And it's not happening. And I think you can probably get some support for this opinion. And so I'm asking you, please help us in academia to teach two sides.
How can I do that? Like, what's a good?
Well, I'm thankful you're coming to Cornell.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and I know you went to Bard, and by doing that, you can make a case.
Yeah, no, if you're at Cornell, I'd look forward to meeting you there. I mean, it's frustrating for me because, you know, when I was doing reporting on the financial services industry, which in a lot of ways is kind of a similar story. It's like this incestuous relationship between government enforcement and business. You know, I got tons of invitations to campuses to speak, and you know, I hear this issue has been kind of coded as a right-wing issue. So even the institutional stuff, the institutional historical stuff that really isn't political, you know, nobody wants to hear it, which is, you know, part of the reason that I'm trying to do all these speeches. I want to understand that better, and you know, if you have any insights to me as to why academics aren't interested in it, I'd be curious to know, because that's a blind spot for me. I don't really understand it.
I keep asking, and it's still a blind spot for me.
All right. Well, thanks for the heads up anyway. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. I don't know if there is another question there. I don't see anybody. Any other question? No, I don't think so.
It looks like Jay wanted to.
Yeah. Sorry. Hey, Jay.
Hey, Matt. Nice to see you.
Hey, how's it going?
So on this question of why academics aren't interested, I think it's really important to know that academics are part of the problem. That in fact at Stanford, where I am, we have this Stanford Internet Observatory that has grants from the NSF, is linked very closely with CISA, is with all of these entities, and it's an active participant. The head of the university was asked in a faculty senate meeting whether it's in Stanford's interest to like be sponsoring this activist organization that is centrally involved in setting the agenda for censorship, and he told the faculty senate that this was just a research activity. I mean, and Stanford has spent millions of dollars trying to protect this activity in court because they're getting sued, or I think at least $1 million. I mean, there was Alex Stamos, I think, told the House committee that weaponization committee under oath that Stanford has spent like 6 figures or something on this. So I think that, and it's not just Stanford, right? Harvard's involved in this with their disinformation center. The University of Washington's involved. A lot of academics, and there's a whole academic field devoted to this, essentially to censoring regular people online. So it's not just that it's the question is why you're not invited. It's like you're actively the enemy, Matt, is the problem in academics.
Well, so are you now. So
well, you know, I know we can be French figures together. I'm waiting for the IRS to show up in my house, but
if I could add to that, I mean, Matt did say follow the money about why intelligence went the way it is. So there's big money. Academics follow the money, but also it will be interesting to see if a Republican administration is elected and starts using the same tools against the academics, whether all of a sudden they'll have a sudden conversion about free speech and First Amendment and so forth, as 3 university presidents seem to have a similar conversion a couple of days ago.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's a good point. But yeah, the money is enormous. I mean, just the incident recently with Harvard and Joan Donovan, if you looked at the sums involved just in that project, you know, they're huge, well, especially for universities. You know, they're getting a little taste of military contracting money in some cases, and there are private foundations. You know, Pierre Omidyar is funding quite a bit of this stuff. The Newmark Foundation has been pouring money, you know, all over the place.
Also, just we're not that craven. The chance to silence your intellectual and ideological opponents is catnip to academics. and they will.
I didn't even think of that. Of course.
That's what we live for. If I could shut down the Keynesians, I'd be in there immediately.
Oh
That
my
was a
God.
joke.
Really fun. No, it's funny. No, there's probably like truth in that, right? That's great. You know, it's not funny, but I think it's important to try to understand what the motivations are. I don't think it's just about money. I mean, I think there's something ideological going on too, but it is unfortunate because academia, you know, academics stand, as Jay, as you know, academics stand to suffer, I would say even more than journalists do, because you know you can have groundbreaking research as opposed to just some dumb news story being suppressed, and you know, that is just can't happen. You know, especially in what we see with groups like CTI League or whatever it is. It's people who have no expertise whatsoever in these topics, sort of censoring people like you, Jay. And I don't understand the logic of that, but you know that can't happen. I don't think so. I would hope that eventually there's a movement against it, but we need you to follow through in your case too. So that's important as well.
Though it seems to me this goes way beyond media and academia. You know, I am just, you know, I've been surprised how, or I mean, it seems like this has just become. Well, I am surprised by how all my left-leaning friends who are not in academia and who are not in the media, who for years styled themselves as civil libertarians and who for years said they cared about censorship, have just no interest at all in this massive, you know, censorship apparatus that the government, together with the universities, together together with the tech companies, has built up. I mean, do you find any different, Matt? You know, I know. I mean, it's just remarkable how few individuals that I find on the left, there are some, but how few actually even think this is an issue.
So I've tried every conceivable way to get. I mean, I grew up in the left-leaning media, so I you know I know how people think over there, and I remember the Bush years very vividly, and so I've tried every one of the arguments. Like a lot of the groups that sell social media monitoring services, or you know, contractors that do anti-disinformation work, they got their starts doing things like selling geolocation data to the Pentagon. And you know, back when that was considered verboten and was you know, deeply controversial on the left, with the, you know, this idea of selling private information. I brought, you know, there are specific examples. There's a company called Babel Street that has been doing that, selling that to you know, to the Pentagon. That doesn't work. I tried to point out the class element of it, which is, you know, really there are no working class people involved in this project. I tried to point out that there are left-leaning political organizations, everything from the Yellow Vests to, you know, especially Jeremy Corbyn's the big one. I mean, there was a lot of that, and we need more documentation on that. But it's not just, you know, the Trumpists who are getting it, but none of those arguments work, and that's, again, it's kind of a mystery to me. Why not? I don't really get it. Do you? I mean, again, I'd be curious to hear.
I still think on balance, they think that the censorship is working in their favor. I mean, you're right to point it out on both sides, but I think they might think, yeah, okay, but on net, they still think that the system benefits them. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, sure, but I mean, I grew up, you know, with the legend of Ira Glasser and Skokie, and it was an article of faith among in American liberalism that we must stand up for speech that we ourselves loathe, for obvious reasons, because if we allow that, then the next thing is going to, you know, the NAACP is not going to be allowed to march. this wasn't rocket science. I mean, most American liberals understood that implicitly, and that's why they always reacted so vehemently to everything from Robert Mapplethorpe to NWA, right? So something happened, a switch happened somewhere, and I just don't really understand. It's a fascinating question.
I think that this is very intimately tied to social media. It's tied to the fact that when everybody thinks the same way and defines a moral code, that it becomes as if that is the right thing. And so you can then do whatever you want to defend that, even when it's just an ends justify the means argument. So, it's perfectly okay to shut down anything that talks about what the role the police have in defending us if policemen killed George Floyd, right? There's no sense. And then I'm doing good doing it. One of the big mistakes that people make in all of this is that they think if I'm doing good, it's okay, right? And that the people that are opposed to me actually know they're doing bad, which is completely ludicrous. Everybody thinks they're doing good. That's why when I asked you the question of where this is coming from, I have to say, I don't think it's coming from a central government thing. I think these are individuals working for these organizations, all under the belief that they're doing good.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. Again, I was talking to somebody, that former GEC person not long ago, who was saying that he thought there were multiple different kinds of people. Like there were your true believers, there were people who were just in it for the money, and opportunists. But I think you're right. I mean, we do. I certainly think that most of the people that I've encountered especially since the Twitter files, they really, really believe that they're doing the right thing. I don't think it's just cynical politics with them, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's a reporting task to get to the bottom of where all this started, and that's one of the things I'm working on a book now, trying to figure that out. When the first time they started looking inward with this stuff was, and I haven't identified that, and but I think that's a key story to get to.
Okay. Thank you very much, Matt. Great presentation. We are very happy you joined us today. And we hope that in the near future, you will join us on campus. We are working to organize a big conference on censorship and surveillance. So we'll reach out to you soon. Yeah, hopefully we get you as a speaker, you and your friends.
Absolutely. Thank you, and thank you so much, and for everybody for turning out. And if please feel free to reach out to me, and hopefully we can meet in person someday.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Matt.